Good afternoon, everybody. Ding dong. Another sports season ends at the expense of a team from Philadelphia. Hey, Chiefs, get your own shtick. And from fears of arbitration to tears of elation, new Astros general manager Dana Brown came to Houston to do two things: chew gum and extend young players, and he's all out of juicy fruit. We're going to talk about it next on Stone Cold Stros, episode 10. That starts right now.
Astros, world champions!
Welcome into Stone Cold Stros. I'm Brandon Strange. I'm alongside SportsMap Houston senior content contributor Charlie Palillo. You can follow him on Twitter at Palillo and read his weekly column on sportsmap.com. Next to him is sportsmap.com editor Josh Yordan. Follow him on Twitter at JoshJordan975. And listen to him Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. on his show Moneyline on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 FM. Charlie, Josh, welcome in.
It's spring training week. No complaints about anything. Well, we'll probably come up with a complaint.
Baseball's in the air.
That's right. Baseball is in the air. And as we're getting everybody, welcome into our live audience that's still making their way in right now. And if you've ever wondered why the intro is so long, it just gives a chance to everybody to get in. And we do this podcast live at 3 p.m. every Monday here on YouTube. And now you're here, so you can interact with us in the chat. We'll feature some of our favorite messages on screen. Please hit like on the video. And if our faces are too much to power through, the audio version gets posted Monday evenings. So just search Stone Cold Stros on your favorite podcast provider like Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow our parent channel, SportsMap Houston, on all your favorite social platforms at SportsMap HOU. Guys, we teased it in the cold open, our main story, which broke Friday afternoon. Hey, Astros, Friday afternoons are for news dumps, not for celebratory news. Christian Javier inks a 5-year, $64 million extension that will run through 2027. So, guys, what are your reactions to Dana Brown hitting the ground running and getting Javier locked up for a couple extra years?
Well, Dana Brown gets Atlanta Braves' MO up and running in a hurry with the Astros. Locking in Javier, 25 years old, 5 years, it's $64 million. Now, there's cash on the barrelhead money, and then there's spreading it out for competitive balance tax reasons. So it's $12.8 million per year. The Astros are paying Javier $5 million in 2023, but it counts 12.8. So they still have dry powder if during the course of the season, because of injuries or subpar performance, there's still about $20 million under the first threshold of $233 million. And securing Javier as one tentpole of the rotation without the health concerns of Lance McCullers, who still has 4 years left on his deal. But Javier, without one full season in the major leagues as a starting pitcher, 5 years, 64. So if the Astros are or will engage in Framber Valdez extension talks, I would think that's the floor. Right? Framber commands more. I think it's a very open question, and I would guess in a majority vote among the three of us, certainly Astros fans at large, who would you rather be as a pitcher this year or over the next 5 years, Framber or Christian Javier? There's no bad answer, but Javier is just so electric. Other than quantity of innings, he was better than Framber across the board last year. But in terms of service time in the major leagues actually throwing, it's advantage Framber. Hence, if Javier was going to arbitration, they had a narrow gap, but it was going to be 3 or 3.5. Framber settled with the Astros at 6.8. So just about double of what Javier had sought. Now, I don't think Framber gets double of what Javier gets if they work out a deal, but 5 years, $64 million, double that, 5 years, check my math, 128. Well, that would nudge over the $25 million range. Carlos Rodon territory as a free agent. But Framber's still 3 seasons away from free agency. He's not going to get to that neighborhood. So does he get $100 million, or is that a nice round number from which to negotiate if the Astros hope to secure one more key cog in their starting pitching machine?
And I think we could see that this spring training. We remember the Bregman extension went down during spring training. The Altuve extension did as well. So this could be in the works coming up here. And my big takeaway with Dana Brown is he's just not talking the talk. He's walking the walk. Last Thursday, he said they felt really good about conversations with Javier, and then boom, they get him signed. So there's a plan here. I'm going to be curious with Bregman and Altuve, because that's somebody Dana Brown brought up that we want to get these guys locked in. So if he's talking about it, I'm listening. He made it happen here with Javier. We saw it with the Braves, Spencer Strider, Michael Harris II. These guys only had that one good year, and then they signed them long-term. So this is the MO. This is kind of how the Astros are going to do things. And hey, Crane said he wanted somebody more aggressive. So here you go, Jim.
It's so hard to judge, championship window for this team because of how long the level of sustained excellence that we've seen from them. It's unheard of.
How about eternal?
Yeah, I don't even know that it's a window anymore. It's more like a mansion full of windows in a 5-car garage with all the doors wide open. Does this move the needle all in that direction of keeping that window open? I know, like, we haven't really seen enough of Javier we haven't even seen a full season of him pitching, but does this move the needle at all in that and keeping that window open? It's another piece of this championship core that's locked up.
I think if you want to look long-term optimistically, then yes. But Javier couldn't leave for another 3 years anyway. Right. Just as Fromber can't leave for another 3 years, and Urquidy can't leave for another 3 years, and Luis Garcia can't leave for another 4 years, and McCullers with 4 years left on his contract, and Hunter Brown 6 years away from potential free agency if he's the next big thing. So Javier was going to be a key piece regardless over a pretty good window of time the next 3 years, but they now tack 2 onto that. Of course, the risk reward, I mean, just dominating stuff. He doesn't throw 98, 99, but that invisible fastball, his innings, hits allowed per inning ratio, just stupefying. Exact same number of strikeouts last season, regular season numbers, as Framber Valdez. Framber threw 53 more innings. Now, grounded to second's just as effective as a strikeout. But in terms of toughness to get a hit off, right, if we want to microcosm it, Javier started 2 no-hitters last season. So if you're an Astros fan on the not quite eve of the first workout, pitchers and catchers of spring training, it's just an exciting item. There's always variability, of course, with injuries, with pitchers. But 5 years, $64 million, 12.8 per year, buying out all the arbitration and a couple of years of free agency. It seems a very favorable risk-reward play. And this is what Dana Brown's been a part of with the Braves for the last several seasons.
Yeah, I like the runway it gives you with the starting pitching, Brandon, to extend that window. You got McCullers, and now, Fromber will be here for a few more years, hopefully even longer, a long-term deal. Javier's locked up. And this is something we talked about as Astros fans during the, all this money being thrown around in free agency. I know they went out and got Abreu, but, and Brantley came back, but they didn't go crazy. But as Astros fans, we're like, we're fine with that if they end up extending and paying some of the current guys on the roster. And that's what they did right here with Javier. Hopefully there's some more moves coming.
Well, I'm ecstatic every time, the Astros make a move in which they lock down more pieces of that championship core. And while I like this signing, I will say this doesn't really seem like a change in philosophy for the Astros. This feels very much like a deal that we've seen from them in the past. When he was asked about Jim Crane's aversion to long-term deals, Dana Brown said that he told Jim Crane, buckle up, it's time. So what I'm interested in is seeing one of those deals, because like I said, this still feels like a very typical, Astros locking up and kind of extending out, slightly extending out a window from a guy who's already under team control. I want to see what one of those long-term deals looks like, because I think that's how you're going to retain a Kyle Tucker if they're going to retain a Kyle Tucker. And I don't really see it, Kyle Tucker getting done per se. But that takes me to my next question for you guys, which is there are still other pieces of the championship core that are in or near arbitration. You guys mentioned them, Fromber and Tucker being, a couple of those pieces. So it's natural to wonder who's next. Fromber, Tucker under team control till 2026. And, we talked about Jeremy Pena a little bit just because he kind of falls into that interesting window in which he hasn't hit arbitration yet, but we've seen Dana Brown do deals like that. He's still pre-arb. He's under team control till 2027. What guys do you see as the next likely person that gets extended on this team?
Well, you have the younger player guys, most notably with Javier signed, sealed, delivered in Fromber. I I just don't think Jose Urquidy is good enough that you're thinking about signing him. Luis Garcia somewhere in between. If it's a bargain deal, maybe you can go another year or two, but I think 3 years is fine. Wait and see what they become. And over a 3-year period, presumably, the Astros refortify the pipeline somewhat and have another pitcher or two that they're thinking is close to the major leagues come 2026, and they can make decisions with guys like Urquidy and Garcia. Among the everyday players, Kyle Tucker is the big one now. Benchmarks, Yordan getting $19 million per year, 6 years, 115. The market has only gone up since then. We made the comp last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, specifically with Dana Brown coming from Atlanta. Kyle Tucker among right fields generally ranks about where Austin Riley, the Braves' terrific third baseman, ranks among third basemen. Probably slight edge Riley among third basemen at this point, but Tucker's clear upper echelon, maybe top 5 right fielder going into this year. Austin Riley got 10 years, $212 million. So if you're Team Tucker, you have to acknowledge Yordan is a clearly better hitter than you, but as an all-around player, and if the market has had these tectonic plate shifts since Yordan took his deal, no pity party for Yordan, locking down $115 million. But if you're Kyle Tucker, you're probably thinking a chunk more than that. Certainly no less than $100 million guaranteed if you wanted to go with a shorter deal. Alex Bregman got 5 years, $100 million. Well, that's probably in the ballpark of what Kyle Tucker would seek. So there are your younger, longer-term nucleus guys. But the quicker ones to potential free agency are Bregman and Altuve, who are both 2 years away. Of course, Altuve is 34 when free agency arrives for him. And Bregman will be 30. So, the sticky wickets of negotiations, how many years along with how much guarantee, right? Altuve, he's on the books at 23 and change, but when they extended him at 5 years, it was $151.5 million. So that was $30.3 million per year for 5 years in new money added to the Astros having him on the incredible cheap from when they'd signed him early in his career. Bregman, meanwhile, at 5 years, $100 million, a free agent at 30. He's a third baseman, not a shortstop, but I'm sure he looks at all that shortstop money this offseason and saying, that's about my ballpark. You can sign me to 40, 41 years of age at the going rate. So what will the Crane/Brown organizational philosophy be on the graybeard guy contracts? But you don't sign Jose Altuve to a 5-year extension to take him to 38, 39 years old. I don't know how much they will factor this in, right? In the era of shifts being gone, right? Athleticism of middle infielders takes on a little increased importance. Altuve is still a tremendous player, but are you going to count on him being as athletic at 37, 38 as he is now? It'd be foolish to do so. So you're going to commit $30 million that far out. He's a good enough hitter that he could be a DH if he maintains that skill set into his mid-30s and maybe the backside of his 30s. So they have a lot of things to consider, but nothing that should panic any Astros fan if they don't get it done before spring training or even the end of this season.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of Dana Brown. He seems like a guy, kind of a straight shooter, as I mentioned earlier, and he was gushing about Alex Bregman the other day. I mean, all the way back to watching him at LSU. I mean, I think there's something there. I think it might be Bregman. That might be the next move they're targeting. So that wouldn't shock me at all if something gets done with Alex Bregman.
If you offer him 4 years, $100 million on top of the 2 years that he has left. And again, Bregman, his take home this year will be about $30 million. And again, next year. But because it was a 5-year extension when it was signed, he counts $20 million per year on the books. Would Bregman say, hey, $25 million? Come on. Correa got well more than that. I'm more durable than him. Xander Bogaerts, I don't consider myself a lesser player than him. 11 years, $280 million. So that's the art of the deal.
It is. And let's keep in mind, same agent there for Correa and Bregman and Altuve, all Scott Boras guys. So the question is Scott Boras going to like that number? I don't know if he'll like that commission that goes with that number, Charlie. He might want that number upped up a little bit.
That makes sense. I'd love to see Fromber get extended as the next guy, but he's 29. We talked about it. You're not going to get a team-friendly deal for him. He's going to look, especially if he stays on this trajectory, he's going to look to grab that bag. He wants to give that big deal. I think some guys low-key that could be candidates to get early extensions. One would be Luis Garcia, but just because I think that's another one of those value deals where you can, extend his time here. It doesn't really cost you that much extra, but it just extends that window in which you've got this core pitching staff together. Even if he is just going to be your fourth or fifth starting pitcher, you need those guys. Another guy who I think could be an underrated candidate to get locked up early, and I'm going to share some credit with this idea with Peter Allen Green here, Brian Abreu. We saw Brian Abreu have a breakout season last year in 2022. He could be the Astros closer of the future, given his nasty stuff. And so I would not rule out Brian Abreu being a guy in which the Astros strike a team-friendly deal with to extend his window here in Houston.
But as a little bit of a late bloomer, with them controlling him for 4 more years as is, I would say that would have to be lower priority on the totem pole.
Absolutely. I think, and also
and do it for 1 full season.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the other thing. That's the caveat is you've really only saw that one breakout year from him, which is why I don't necessarily think, for both reasons, I don't think we'll see Jeremy Pena or Brian Abreu as, maybe those urgent candidates because of the amount of team control. And you're going to want to see them perform for multiple seasons. Speaking of young guys, Keith Law of The Athletic put out his rankings of Astros prospects, and we'll put out just the top 10 that he has here just to go on the board here, and I'll read it for those who are listening to our podcast. So in order from 1 through 10 is right-handed pitcher Hunter Brown. Number 2 is catcher prospect Jainer Diaz. Number 3 is outfielder Drew Gilbert. 4 is also an outfielder, Colin Barber. Outfielder Jacob Melton is number 5. Catcher Corey Lee, 6. Our old friend, Forrest Whitley, who we spoke about on the podcast last week. Right-handed pitcher Forrest Whitley at number 7. Outfielder / second baseman Pedro Leon at number 8. Justin Durden, outfielder at number 9. And Logan, it's either Kearney or Cerny. I can't figure out which one it is. Outfielder at number 10. So, guys, any takeaways from Law's rankings here of the Astros top prospects in the farm system right now?
No big beef. And the keynote is that Hunter Brown's the only top 100 prospect on the board by either Law with The Athletic or MLB.com's pipeline rankings. But the Astros farm system's not in great shape. You pick low every year. You go consecutive years without first or second round picks. And the Astros have also missed on some picks over that time, right? It's not like Luno's record was spotless. He did enough brilliant work to set up this dynasty. So there's work to be done. And hello, Dana Brown, who talk about refreshing, as Josh alluded to earlier in straight shooting. He said, I cannot blow the draft. I guess when you come in with a 4 or 5 year contract, you have pretty good security right off the top. But he put that right on his shoulders. Yeah, we need to draft well. Doesn't matter where we're drafting. But that's how we're going to reload. I imagine we'll get into here the catcher rankings with Martin Maldonado, a year older and presumably a year slower. Whether it's Lee, Diaz, or some combo platter of the two, that's at least 50 starts that the Astros need behind the plate. Maldonado started 110 games this past season. I wouldn't think you're anticipating him having a larger workload than that. So that to me is it's about the only position battle of note in spring training for the Astros. Is it Corey Lee, their former first-round draft pick, who, frankly, his hitting credentials in the minors are not good? And then you have Yainer Diaz, who's done nothing but kill it at the plate through the minor leagues. Maldonado, obviously, in this lineup, you can carry him or have been able to carry him batting ninth and prioritizing defense and handling pitching. So that would probably be edge Corey Lee, but he's not Yoda back there. He's a better defensive catcher relative to Yainer Diaz, who I guess other than a really strong throwing arm, the general book on Diaz as a receiver is, boy, he's a really good hitter. One variable, let me just toss in on the catcher competition. If Michael Brantley's not healthy, you can carry both of them and spot Diaz some DH at bats. I don't want to say you can just stick anybody in left field for a start here or a start there. But if Brantley's healthy, we know who the Astros' primary 9 are. And then you have the 4 bench spots after that, a backup catcher, we presume David Hensley, giving an edge to Jake Myers or Maurice Dumont, or are they both here? And if so, well, that gets you to 13 non-pitchers. Well, if Brantley's not ready to go starting the season, maybe that's a window for both Lee and Diaz to get a little bit of early season run. But hey, someone other than Martin Maldonado is going to be, or certainly should be, catching for the Astros basically 1 out of every 3 games, if not more than that.
Yeah, the guy that I kind of wanted to bring up and talk about, somebody reached out, one of our viewers, and said, could you talk about maybe somebody that could surprise this spring that we haven't talked about? And I thought Chandler Rome wrote a nice article in the Chronicle, and he talked about Justin Yordan, and that, he was an undrafted free agent. Remember in 2020, the draft only went 5 rounds, and they signed a bunch of guys, and he was really good in Double-A last year. But when he came up to Sugar Land in September, Chandler Rome was saying, man, he struck out a lot, 40 times and 128 at bats. But in Double-A, he slashed 324, 411, and 616, pretty darn good numbers. So he's a guy that can play all 3 outfield positions, though he's probably better suited for one of the corner spots. But maybe he's somebody that could jump out this year. I believe, Charlie, didn't you say he's 25 years old already? So he's a bit older of a prospect, but a big kid, over 6 feet tall. I was watching his swing on YouTube a little bit. Maybe he could surprise. He could be somebody to keep an eye on this spring.
For me, it would be Drew Gilbert. Not so much that he can surprise and challenge for a roster spot, but hey, he was their first-round draft pick, and he's a 3-year college guy, so he's 22 years old, and there are all kinds of exceptions over 140 years of Major League Baseball, 154 years of Major League Baseball, 1876, and 147, give or take. But the bulk of really special talents force their way to the major leagues by age 21 and 22, whether it's guys who come out of high school or come out of the Dominican or Venezuela. I mean, we can just run through Astros history if you wanted to, from Nolan Ryan, not originally an Astro, but you catch my drift, to Joe Morgan and Cesar Cedeno, to much more modern times, Jeff Bagwell and Jose Altuve. Every one of those guys was in the major leagues for good at age 21. Doesn't mean they all tear it up and become what they're ultimately to become at the very start, but they get there sooner than later. So Gilbert as the first-round pick, very toolsy. I'd like to see him start the year, healthily, having a dislocated elbow. But he is the hope for next generation Astros leadoff hitter. So I would hope he gets to Double-A this year, and by September 24, he's knocking on the door. And by 2025, the latest, Brantley presumably is often retired at that point. What's Chas McCormick's career arc? What's Jake Myers' career arc? There's an outfield spot over the next couple of years for Drew Gilbert if he proves to be worthy of his first-round draft status.
Yeah, and that's my takeaway from it, was just the amount of outfielders that litter that top 10 list. So the Astros would hope to be prepared for losses of Brantley eventually, and perhaps Tucker. Chas McCormick had made. Well, you know what? Let me not do that, because I want to kind of bat that around, but. You had, Charlie, you talked about this a little bit. We were talking about the catcher spot, before we got on here, and we made the observation that Law has Diaz ranked above Lee as far as just, his prospects. The organization probably doesn't see it that way, because they feel like, Lee's put in his time. He's the better defensive catcher. They obviously prioritize, as you mentioned. Josh, I think Charlie's answered this, but when do you think we'll see Diaz, and where do you see Diaz fitting into this roster and finding a spot? Because it's going to be a little cramped, right?
It is. I think Lee will, and of course Maldonado is going to play quite a bit. Maybe Corey Lee plays twice a week, something like that. But I think maybe more in a DH role we'd see Diaz. I think he'll get some starts from time to time. It depends on Brantley. If he's not healthy, then yeah, we could see both of them in the lineup. You never know. But I think it's going to be DH and maybe spelling Abreu at first base from time to time. I think maybe it'll start off like that. And if he performs well, Dusty's going to keep running him out there. But, we shall see. But I don't think he's going to be regularly the first option at catcher. They, as you mentioned, they've just showed they care so much about the defensive side of catching. And I don't see why that would change now. I mean, if it didn't happen in the playoffs when you kept running Maldonado out there, I don't think it's going to happen now.
No, and I obviously they value Maldi as a savvy player and what he can do at the plate. Obviously, him being able to stick out his elbow and draw, hit by pitches, it was certainly valuable in the postseason. So it is going to be interesting. Charlie, you were going to say something. I saw you and I cut you off.
Just on Diaz, that if you can carry them both, or Diaz nudges ahead of Lee, and Yainer Diaz performs to his minor league pedigree, and hey, definition of potential is everything you've yet to achieve. So until you do it in the major leagues, fake yogiism. Until you do it, you haven't done it. But Yainer, as a platoon partner with Brantley, not necessarily in left field, but as you slot around DH stuff, when Yordan's presumably, 45 to 50% or whatever the baggy formula is on his playing time. But Diaz, Brantley splitting at bats, left field DH, apart from when Yordan's taken days off from the field. That could blend Brantley's high on base percentage and professional savvy with some thump against left-handed pitching with Diaz.
But Charlie, don't you think? I mean, we know Maldi's going to be out there, barring any sort of injury. I mean, hell, even last season, in spite of injury, they kept running Maldi out there, which we found out at the end of the year. He had a broken hand, had been playing through a sports hernia since I think August or something like that. So they value mightily what Maldi brings. And if Lee's going to be the backup catcher, and we know that Diaz is not a polished catcher, are they going to prioritize maybe Diaz getting reps down in AAA to where he can become a better catcher to increase his value at that position?
Probably, because they're both right-handed hitters, so it's not a future platoon. It could still be a job share if Martin Maldonado is done after this season, and you still have both Lee and Diaz around. But with the Astros scores being so good, and the whole point being ready to repeat, ready to reign, numeral 2, their marketing slogan for this year. You have David Hensley, who can play all your infield spots as your utility guy there. Do you really need to carry Mauricio Dubon, who I know Dusty likes, and his range in center field, and he certainly can play the infield spots? But Dubon and Myers, Jake Myers is probably a guy on a spot this spring that he better look good. But if Diaz hits, I'd rather have both Diaz and Lee on the 26-man coming out of Florida than have both Dubon and Myers. I don't think necessarily Dusty sees it that way, at least where Dubon is concerned. But where are real roles for both Dubon and Hensley? To me, Hensley has first crack at that.
Yeah. Dusty loves Dubon like I love Christian Javier. So that's just a thing. I think he's going to get.
Let's talk about that, Josh, because I wanted to bring this to you next, because there are a lot of outfielders. And we had Chas McCormick make the statements with a quote from Chas McCormick over the offseason saying that, he's earned the spot. It's his to lose now. You're not so sure about that.
I'm not. I mean, we've seen in that same piece, Chandler Rome reminded me, it was until like September that Chaz started getting all the regular at-bats in center field. And you brought up that quote, Brandon, about Dusty talking about OPS versus lefties with McCormick. And, they were asked why he wasn't getting more opportunities and talked about how the stats are more for the fans. I just, I wonder if Dusty's kind of open-minded about this. The other problem is Jake Myers. Dusty complained last year that they brought Jake Myers back too soon, that he didn't get enough at bats. Dusty made the point that this guy just got a very low amount of at bats, and they're bringing him back to the major leagues. But you're bringing him back when the rest of the league, they're in the middle of the season, they're in full swing. Pitchers are throwing nasty breaking stuff, and Jake was just kind of getting his footing, and he wasn't ready. And Dusty said he was outvoted, that he didn't think Jake Myers was ready to come back yet, but Click brought him up. And then remember, Click made the comment, like, maybe we'll reevaluate, how our process is for bringing players back from injury, and basically kind of admitted he brought him back too soon, because Myers said he was healthy. But if you watch those games, you could see something wasn't right.
And the key edge that Jake Myers had in the evaluation over McCormick was defense. So whatever happens forward, it's going to take something for Chas McCormick to be remembered for one play more so in his career than the catch on the track in Philadelphia. Look, Dusty was off the cuff answering a question, and maybe he got tired of hearing a little bit. That OPS's fan stuff is ridiculous. That's a little bit of old man, dusty, old school, get off my lawn. OPS certainly isn't everything, but that's not some complicated, arcane, obscure, useless stat. It's a pretty comprehensive number of what you do in the batter's box. Chas McCormick was a stud against left-handed pitching. Chas McCormick was a scrub against right-handed pitching. Light switch on and off, black and white, day and night. So the ideal would be to have a left-handed hitting complement to McCormick for that job, unless he has another step forward in his game, right? He's 27 years old already. So while he's still a young guy to Astros fans and young in major league experience, quantum leap forward at 27, you don't typically see, but you don't never see it. But if McCormick wants to be the everyday center fielder, unless there's just no legitimate alternative, you can't carry an OPS of 620 against right-handed pitching, because you face more right-handed pitching than left-handed pitching in the major leagues.
Yeah, and I think it's funny to dismiss, or for Dusty to dismiss, the relevance of McCormick being able to hit against lefties, considering, that it is the splits are very, very telling. And it's not just about what he did during the regular season, but he carried that into the postseason. And Garrett Cole would like to have a word with you if you think that McCormick is incapable of hitting dominant left-handing pitching.
And quickly too, Brandon, remember in that same interview, Dusty chimed in about him, maybe he's not so great against lefties. In a sense, he was like, we used him twice against lefties. He struck out both times. So Chas he's not perfect against lefties. So I think Dusty was, like Charlie was saying, he was tired of answering those types of questions over and over.
Sometimes how you answer the question can be influenced by who asked the question.
Great point.
Right. And what they're getting at too. And Dusty is nothing if not going to hear questions about his lineups. And to his credit, and in his defense as well, we did hear that there was a power struggle happening behind the scenes. James Click was pushing from Jake Myers to get that playing time. And from the quotes that we saw that came after the World Series, that basically there was the power struggle. Jim Crane asked Click, are you going to risk are you gambling your career on Jake Myers? And Click said yes. And so we saw how that played out. And now we saw, Crane, if nothing, is not a man of his word, because Click basically walked or was allowed to walk after that, basically given a ceremonial 1-year contract at the same price. But yeah, there was clearly that power struggle that was happening. There were multiple power struggles that were happening that probably played into the playing time. We found out where guys hit in the lineup. And so, yes, I'm sure Dusty was very tired of hearing those questions, because that's literally 80% of social media during Astros season. Is there's nothing to talk about as far as, any sort of big thing. It's always where someone hits in the lineup. In one of those few games in which they lose, that's one of the things that they point at is, if only this person was hitting here and this person was. And look, it does seem like Dusty throws a dart at a dartboard to figure out what the lineups are from week to week or from game to game. But, I guess in a little bit of a credit to him, there was a power struggle that presumably will not be happening next season.
Yes. And the lineup was pretty consistent in the playoffs. Remember when we were playing the Yankees in the ALCS, it seemed like they had a different order and lineup every single game. Whereas once we got to the playoffs, it was pretty consistent for Dusty.
The Yankees almost had a different shortstop in every game. In fact, they had 3 different ones through the first 3 games of the ALCS. That's not gonna win you anything unless you're very, very fortunate that your other spots are taken care of. Speaking of lineup spots, the Astros claimed left-handed pitcher Matt Gage off of waivers. This is the release.
No.
This is the release from the Astros. And so that brings their total lefties that enter camp, I think it's 4. We have a McTaggart tweet here that basically outlines. So this Gage, Davis, Mashinsky, and Taylor are the lefties that enter into camp as potentials. But basically this does two things. One is it scratches that lefty itch, or may help contribute towards scratching that lefty itch that Dusty Baker has. The other thing is that basically is the final spot in the 40-man roster. So does this move kind of indirectly answer the questions of Yuli Gurriel and whether we see Yuli Gurriel back on the Astros in 2023?
Not because they filled the 40-man spot. They have several pitchers if they wanted to create a spot. Mushinski, J.P. France, Sean Dubin, Ronel Blanco. They wanted to open up a spot on the 40-man. They could do so. I just think all along the Astros properly have been very polite in addressing Yuli, but at no point has the needle really pointed in the direction of them bringing him back. And if his market's down to $3 million, but they want a little more versatility, and they've moved on from better and younger players. So it's not as if Yuli's departure is inconsequential, particularly in the hearts and minds of Astros fans. But where's the playing time and belief in performance, right? He revived certainly in the postseason. That doesn't override a regular season where he was awful across the board, not just the raw data, batting average, on base percentage. He stopped walking, slugging, only 8 home runs. 40 doubles is not a special number when you only have 8 home runs with them as a first baseman. But he mastered the pop fly to right field last season, slowed bat speed. How often did he barrel it up? Exit velocity, all that stuff. I mean, he was a player who fell off a cliff. Welcome, Jose Abreu. So I just think it fills the spot. But if, say, the Astros had the offer for Pirates center fielder Brian Reynolds, they could create that spot on the 40-man for the guy they wanted to fill that spot. I just don't think it's Yuli at this point.
Yeah, and Matt Gage, I don't want to get too excited here. He's 30 years old, and he's pitched like 13 innings in the big leagues. So, you hope he's a late bloomer, but I'm not counting on a lot with this move.
It's the Blake Taylor, Matt Gage pitch-off in spring training. Again, top of the first world issues for the Astros. Who's the last man on the roster among the non-pitchers? And if you're going to carry a lefty for the sake of carrying a lefty, it didn't really retard their chances in the postseason. So if they want a lefty for the sake of having a lefty, that's bad news for Seth Martinez or maybe Phil Maton's roster spot's not entirely safe. But good for Matt Gage, who won't have to go through customs every time he comes home from a road trip if he makes the Astros.
Indeed. And I think with the statement that we got from we got another statement, I believe, last week from Dana Brown, where he was kind of asked again about Yuli, and he was just very diplomatic about his answer. But I think all the signs are on the wall. And again, we looked at, we've been talking about, there's interest from Yuli in this team, or he's got an advocate on this team, and yet he still remains unsigned. I think at this point, it's safe to say, unless barring some sort of like invitation to someone's spring training or something along those lines, he's going to get a very, very minimal deal with a team with just the prospect of getting some time. It's unfortunate because, man, he played such a pivotal role in that World Series win in 2022. We will always remember that run. We will always remember Yuli Gurriel as being a staple in both the championships that the Astros won in this 6-year window. But it sure looks safe to say that Yuli is gonzo.
Well, personal bond and affection aside, if sodium pentothal were necessary, Jose Altuve, Alex Bregman, Yordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker, the core four presently. Okay, we're getting a free pass. We can get out of the Abreu contract and bring back Yuli. Should we do it? No, and no. I mean, the big wheel keeps on turning. There's no shame in it. But the Astros made what on paper projects to be a substantial upgrade from a guy who was a sub-zero WAR in 2022, right? Meaning replacement player level. You could basically pluck an average guy from AAA and he could have put up the numbers that Yuli did in the regular season last year. For Jose Abreu, I think it was about a 4.5 WAR guy. And should strengthen the strength of the Astros lineup that much more. So thanks for the memories. I mean, we're only another 4 years away from the 10-year reunion season or 10-year anniversary celebration season of the first championship. Yuli will be welcomed back with a thunderous ovation if he makes it to town.
He will. And I'm an optimist. I'd like to think that we'll see, and also a wrestling fan. So I'd like to see a storyline in which Abreu wins MVP in the World Series and he takes off the mask and it's actually Yuli all along. And someone from the announcing booth says, "Good God Almighty, it's Yuli Gurriel." So I'd love to see that play out like that. But that's just happened in wrestling. Before we get to our bottom line question of the week, I wanted to share a couple of memes. It's last night was Super Bowl, so I wanted to share a couple of Astros / baseball memes. And so, Jack, I can run these. So the first one is this funny one. This is me watching Philly fans get upset yet again. And for those listening, I'm just going to cut this out because I'm not going to describe these to you, but for those watching, you get an exclusive piece of content here. So this was a really funny one. The next one was Rihanna, me looking at Astros opening day. I like the gaze from Rihanna looking kind of possessed there. And then this is the call from the Astros clinching. Tucker comes on, Kyle Tucker, they finished the job. So yeah, that's a pretty funny one there. Again, there were lots of them, but those are the ones that stuck out to me. So our bottom line question. Well, actually, before we go on, Charlie, you and I spoke in a video probably over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago now, kind of comparing the Chiefs to the Astros. The Chiefs now have their second ring. They've been to 5 straight title games. That, like I said in the open, Chiefs get your own gimmick, but it's kind of playing out pretty similarly, correct? So we were pretty spot on in that comparison.
Congratulations to us. And obviously there are fundamental differences.
Yeah.
Are we casting Yordan in the Patrick Mahomes role? Closest to it. Altuve for career, but in this lineup right now, I think Yordan's the unquestioned man.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to hit on too, Brandon, in that thought where you're making the playoffs, you're making deep runs every year, like the Chiefs tend to be doing, AFC championship games, Astros playing all these extra innings in the postseason. I thought Brian McTaggart did a nice job on MLB.com. He talked about the Astros pitchers have thrown 114 more innings, including the postseason, than any other team in the last 2 seasons, with, several guys having career highs in innings pitched. Fromber, who now we've seen Fromber's backing out of the World Baseball Classic, which I'm happy about, by the way. I don't want to see him throw more innings, but also Christian Javier, Luis Garcia, and Urquidy threw more innings than they're used to throwing last year. So that'll be something to keep an eye on, that it feels like a really short off season. Don't get me wrong. I'm ready for baseball to come back, but you got to be careful with these pitchers, man, especially the guys that haven't done it before.
Yes. And Tom Verducci, the terrific Sports Illustrated baseball writer who moonlighting and is underselling it on Fox. Mm-hmm. But he tracks this year to year, and the maintaining performance or likelihood of injury factor, guys who blow away their prior workload by 40 innings or more, 50 innings, that I want to say it's regression to the mean, but that, even great young talented pitchers, it doesn't mean they're going to need Tommy John surgery or a rotator cuff is going to fall out or something like that. But it's not just a straight line trajectory every year for everybody. Get better, get better, get better until you reach whatever your individual peak is. So it will bear watching. And if Hunter Brown is the truth and you have that 6-man rotation for different reasons than the way they handled Justin Verlander last season, even with guys a decade younger or more, and with the money that's invested or that you intend to sink into these guys from generations past, you'd call it babying them when men were men. Seaver and Carlton and Gibson, they didn't complete what they started. They were angry. 300 innings in a season was the bell cow mark, not 200 innings. So yeah, that's, if the Astros still have a terrific lineup and an excellent defense, but pitching was certainly their spine last year. And, if the back goes out a little bit, you're more vulnerable than you would otherwise project to be.
I think the comparison from the Chiefs still holds up, except for the fact that the Chiefs probably got help from the league last night in a call, whereas the Astros tend to win in spite of the league being against them. And
Come on now, though, Brandon. When the defensive back himself says, "Yeah, I held him,"
yeah,
honorable,
yes,
honorable,
yes.
and the right call. Forget this. Let the players decide the game. BS.
Yeah,
Rules are rules. A penalty
Yeah.
is a penalty. Now there are missed calls, but
Yeah.
that was not one of them.
I don't have skin in the game, so I don't really feel passionately about it. I don't really care either one of these teams, whether they win or not. And I'm way too smart to actually put money on games. Smart, not calling bettors dumb, just smart because I know I don't pick the right side on these things. So I choose not to participate in that. And then as far as the commentary on the offseason being so abbreviated, we had a quote. I didn't include it in our graphics here, but we had a quote from Bregman speaking with Mark Berman, where he basically said, "Yeah, it felt like the season went into basically Thanksgiving," and he said, "This is the shortest off season any of us have ever had professionally," and so that when you think of that, you do think of the toll and the amount of innings that these pitchers pitched, and many of them setting career highs for the number of innings that they've pitched. Christian Javier is going to join that as well as we roll into 2023, because you would assume he'll be making more starts, which is what we've all screamed for. But there is certainly a question about, how do these guys pitch going down the stretch? The good thing is they have age on their side. We saw Justin Verlander rack up the innings as well. The oil was kind of leaking from the cart as we made it into the World Series for Justin Verlander. So you hope that maybe the, as Charlie would say, the fungibility of these young arms is an advantage for the Astros, because they're going to need it.
And for longer conversation, perhaps on another day, led by Fromber, the Astros have a starting rotation of guys who work pretty quickly out there. So I don't think we're going to have Astros pitchers fretting or griping all that much about the pitch clock, which would be one of the stories of the season as we get into it for both pitchers and hitters. But even among the Astros, Ryan Presley's a quick worker. Hector Neris maybe, but some dramatic rules changes this year look, spring training baseball is not designed to be exciting,
right?
But with the shifts banned and the pitch clock, and batters better be ready, and the larger bases and limitations on abilities to try to pick off runners without risking an automatic balk call, there was meat on the bone for Astros spring training and all the other teams in 2023.
While we're on that topic, and I don't mean to belabor this at the end of the podcast, but that does make me think of, we look at where we're set up to see, like you said, preseason will be a sneak peek into the pitch clock. How much does this now make that catcher position that much more important? Because pitchers don't really have time to shake off a lot of pitches. And do you think that we'll eventually get to a place where we bypass the catcher making the call and the pitcher agreeing or shaking it off? Do we get to a place in which the pitchers actually start making the calls first to abbreviate the process?
I'm going to guess no, just because of the way the pitching is cultivated these days, kind of bridging the gap with the little wristwatch that the pitcher can hear slider inside. So that hastens things along a little bit. But to me, it will be fun to see. Generally, I think of myself as a traditionalist, but there are times where you need to evolve in terms of the entertainment product or just how you're handling the pace of the game. So I know there are those screaming about the pitch clock or screaming about banning shifts. Well, in the NFL, defensive backs used to just be able to beat the hell out of wide receivers all over the field. In the NBA, the rules have changed to where you could play no zone to where you can basically play all zone except for the legal 3-second in the key. So for baseball, not a dying sport, not a broken sport, but a sport that could use a B12 shot in terms of the pace of action. So I'm really hoping it works out.
Yeah, and to your point, Brandon, I don't think so, because I don't know anybody more involved than Maldonado when it comes to calling games, and we've heard about it to death, right? But I notice him looking over to the Astros dugout before he's calling pitches very often. I don't know for sure that's why he's looking over there, but that's what I think is going on. So yeah, I think the pitching coaches and the team want it to go through the catcher and to the pitcher.
Makes sense. And so I appreciate it. So we've finally come to the part of the show in which we ask our listeners and viewers to participate. It is the bottom line question of the week. This comes to us. CBS Sports ranked the Astros #1 in their power ranking, and credit for them for not taking the salacious route and trying to bait clicks by putting some. I've seen anywhere from the Mets at the top, or to all different sorts of iterations of that. But in part of it, Matt Snyder, who was the author of this article, he projects Yordan Alvarez to have a better season than Aaron Judge. So, guys, that makes me wonder what your opinion is, and I want to ask everybody who's watching this right now. You can vote as well, and try to put your Astros orange-colored glasses aside and just look at it as for the question that it is. Do you guys project, either Yordan or Judge to have the better season in 2023? And I'll start with the panel. So Charlie, I'll have you answer that first.
As a regular season proposition only, I will go with Yordan, though Astros fans should acknowledge or just accept it wasn't close last season. Regular season. I mean, Judge had Yordan by nearly 100 points in OPS. And late June, it was Yordan ahead by about 80 points. Judge had an historic regular season. Regular season. He was a monster. So I think a little bit what goes up must come down. Judge hit 52 home runs as a rookie, and I know he's changed his diet and all that, so they think he's going to be Mr. Durable going forward, but he's on the wrong side of 30. He's a big, big guy, which will be a challenge to age well. I don't think he's going to crater this year, but Yordan should still be ascendant, and he's 5 years younger, and I really can't envision a scenario where Yordan's going to hear it from Astros fans if he has a rough week or two that, yeah, you got 6 years, 115 million. Now you have it in cruise control, big guy. If Judge goes 0 for 4 opening day, he's going to hear boos. And, he's there. He got his money. He's happy. He's now the captain of the Yankees. But 9 years, 360 million is going to be ringing in his ears a lot when the postseason arrives. If he's not delivering, then it's going to be a bloodbath up there. But with that possible element, and Judge had one of the greatest seasons of all time, right? Regular seasons of all time. So I think he is due for some regression. He can drop off a fair amount and still be awesome, but I'll bet on Yordan this year.
Yeah, I'm going to do the same. I'm going to go with Yordan. And a lot of this is my fantasy football background. I don't like betting on guys coming off a career season. They almost always disappoint. It's just, there's nowhere to go but down. And it really, to me, it's only injuries. I think they could slow Yordan down. So I'm going to go with the Astros here. Yordan, and I'm sure Judge will have a nice season. It's just, there's something about it that following year, maybe he's got the contract now. I'm going to give it to Yordan. He's younger. I think he's up and coming, and maybe Yordan can ride that wave of what they did in the playoffs into the regular season. That would be incredible.
And if we're not necessarily splitting hairs, but if you're drawing up the plus and minus column on this, I think Yordan stands to benefit a little bit more from the abolition of the shifts, which do discriminate proportionally more so against left-handed hitters than against right-handed hitters. So Yordan the lefty, Judge to the righty. That's one more check mark in the Yordan column.
I think personally, it depends on what you define as having a better season. I think statistically, both of you have stated that there certainly could be a element of Judge regressing to the mean and kind of coming back down. Maybe he doesn't follow up that historic season that he had last year with something similar, but he can still stand to lose a lot of those points and stats and still have a great season. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to say that maybe Judge has the better statistical season. And I say that because I feel like there's probably going to be a lot of pressure on him to perform, in which because he kind of carries their team. That's kind of, they rely on him so much more. And so maybe you'd say, well, he could fold under that pressure. Certainly could. I don't think Yordan feels like the entire fate of his team is on his back. He has a lot more help than Aaron Judge has, not the least of which comes from the pitching side of it. But yeah, I'm going to say that maybe Yordan doesn't have a statistically a good season. And I think part of that is what we did see in the postseason, which were, he didn't have a whole lot of hits in the postseason. What he had were very meaningful hits in the postseason, but he kind of bookended his postseason with very, very epic, dramatic hits and home runs. And in between there weren't as many. That was a little bit of what we saw during the season with him. And again, we don't know whether there was a lot of talk about that hand injury and whether maybe it was that hamate bone that was, giving him issues. And so we don't really know how much of that really was, and we didn't know whether it was one or both hands. And they played coy the entire season with what the true nature of that injury was and how it was really affecting him. We do know whatever it was, whether it was injured or not, it certainly at some point had entered his psyche and kind of threw him off. Something was throwing him off, and then he just seemed to get it back and started mashing again. So I'll just say, just for the sake of being a contrarian here, which I kind of hate doing that, but I'll just say it's Judge. So let's take a look at our responses here. We'll start with Jack Brame, who's our producer. He says Alvarez certainly had a better postseason than Judge. That's not even the question, Jack, but I can't argue with it. Yordan is going to spank Judge this time, says Renovation Gaming. Peter Allen Green says Judge is way better at hitting terrible pitching. Sure. And Aurelio says Judge equals juice balls. I like that. And then Yeah Boy says, I think it's close, but Judge because another big home run season. Okay. And then Mr. JC Willie says juiced balls. So I'm guessing he gives the vote to Judge, but he thinks there's funny business going on. I would assume that's what that means. Your boy says he thinks Yordan's going to hit 48 home runs. That'd be awesome if we saw that. John Divin says, I'll put my money on Yordan, especially if Judge doesn't get the juiced balls. A lot of juice. I see a theme happening in this feedback here. And I think that's going to be it for our answers. I know we're on a delay, guys. I know there is a little bit of a delay between what we can see and what guys enter, but we do appreciate all of the feedback.
And that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so.
And that is going to do it for another episode of Stone Cold Stros. I want to thank Charlie Palillo and Josh Jordan, my cohorts, for joining me today and talking some ball. Who else am I going to talk baseball in February with? You guys and the guys in the comments. Thank you so much for our chat. Thank you so much for viewing and engaging and listening to us. And for everybody who's listening to this on the audio version, we appreciate you sticking around through this and listening to us talk baseball. So again, until next week, we will be live here on YouTube again at 3 p.m. as we are every week. And we will be that much closer to the 2023 season. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Go Astros.